Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My concern today is that America cannot face another supply chain shock like we've seen over the last 3+ years. It has damaged our economy, it's damaged workers, and we've invested a heck of a lot of money through the IIJA, the CHIPS and Science Act, there's provisions in the NDAA, all of these things that we've done to shore up our supply chain and the infrastructure that supports it. The supply chain shocks were caused by a number of things. The COVID policies of the lockdowns and shutting down businesses and identifying which were critical businesses and which weren't, and how that flowed through our economy. There was a shift in demand. Suddenly we needed unusual amounts of PPE. We had people working from home. Huge demand for yoga pants, not for me personally, but there was a big shift in demand caused by COVID. And then we had really irresponsible levels of stimulus by the Biden administration that shifted consumer habits and consumption patterns in ways that created an artificial scarcity through all of that stimulus. And there's things that we can't anticipate, like the Ever Given ship that blocked the Suez Canal for several months and causing this cascade. We're seeing an echo of that with the Houthis in the Red Sea, changing supply lines, forcing ships to take longer routes. It's not just ships taking longer routes. All of those ships are carrying inventory. And if the route is longer, that means more inventory is needed and is at sea. And it has an effect when it arrives in port and when perhaps they all arrive at the same time and we end up with the enormous backlogs like we saw off of Long Beach, for example. My hope is, in a very brief conversation with you, that we can try to just get a pulse of how things are going. The things that I'm excited about is reshoring of some of our manufacturing, certainly shortening the supply chains. The CHIPS Act is critical in how that flows through, particularly for chip production in the United States and in my district for Micron. But if I may ask, particularly Mr. Tucker, if I can start with you, are you seeing a shift in a way from just-in-time manufacturing and maybe some of the inventories that companies are carrying? Is there a shift in your, in the trucking industry of what's being moved and where that you think is perhaps encouraging about the state of the supply chain? Can you give an insight from your perspective of the trucking industry?
Yes, sir. I think that during the worst of COVID, during the worst, of the pandemic, I think companies were stocking a little bit extra inventory, but the holy grail in retail is to throughput and not to have inventory. It's costs, and it adds cost to our. So I think that what I see today is along the lines of what has been already said in other testimony, that the global supply chain, including our supply chain, has normalized, or normalized is, there's no such thing as normal anymore, but it reached equilibrium. And one that is far more predictable, at least with accepting, global issues like the Houthis in the Red Sea.
Well, there's shocks that we can't anticipate. I think that's part of what we're trying to avoid and what a lot of this investment has gone to. Mr. Edwards, can I actually focus the same question to you? Are you seeing changes in what's passing through your port in terms of where it's coming from, how long it's takes to clear, and what the throughput is? Is there encouraging signs there?
Congressman, very encouraging signs. The fluidity of all ports is much better than it was in the days of the pandemic. So the dwell time of cargo is considerably lower, which tells you that the supply chain beyond the ports is all working well. And I do believe that a number of ports, ourselves included, are making large investments to allow for surges, shocks, etc. So I think the best operating ports are running exceptionally well. There is undoubtedly some sourcing away from China. You can see that in the fastest growth, for example, would be India or Vietnam, would be significant growth engines in international trade that may have been sourced from China before.
It's a shift away from China.
Yes.
I think that's critical. I just have a few seconds. In fact, my time's expired, so thank you very much.